Good morning to you. I'm glad you found a time to be with us today. Here are the latest headlines from across the continent of Africa. We start with the newspapers from Kenya. The Star newspaper, inside a secret push for Raila-Ruto dialogue. Headliners get in the way and Odinga scales up his mass protest to twice a week, heightening anxiety across the country. That story you will find on page 4 and 5 on the Star newspaper. And cry for justice after son shot dead during protest. That is the main pictorial. Raila's Star boycott call is irresponsible. That is what the CEO of Radio Africa, Patrick Kwako, there has said, and that story is on page 2 on the Standard. On the Star, sorry, the Standard newspaper. The main headline, Battle for the Hustler's Soul. President William Ruto's rallying call during the campaigns was let's make life better for the low-income earner. With a shoe on the other foot, opposition leader is consolidating support of the Wananchi to protest the high cost of living. That special coverage is on page 6, 7, 8 and 9 on the Standard newspaper. Cabinet allows state farms sale without MPs. It's interesting. That story you'll find on page 4. Uhuru team loaded telecom debt on citizens. That you'll find on page 10. Kihika faces jail term over CEC jobs. That you'll find on page 51. Drought killed 43,000 in Somalia. You'll find that on the World News page on page 37. Little there. And then little to smile about on World Water Day. Rivers are drying and few water sources are getting polluted. Urgent steps are needed to protect riparian lands. That is the special coverage, and today is World Water Day. There you go. The Daily Nation. Raila steps up onslaught against Ruto, upping the ante. Opposition leader Raila Odinga yesterday announced mass action twice a week, even as he made a fresh demand for the reinstatement of 4 independent electoral and boundaries commission bosses who were forced out and accused police of brutality during Monday's protest. The story is on page 4. And Ruto, Gachagua, Mudavadi get 802 million Kenya shillings for cars. I guess Kenyans this morning are asking, but why and for what? And in the current economy. Anyway, I'm the victim here. Maxim tells court Assad was abusive. And then counties that are loved by teachers. That is Nairobi, Mombasa and Kajiado are some of the most preferred counties by teachers seeking transfers following the operationalization of the delocalization policy by the TSC. Official data now shows. So that also we have there on the Daily Nation. And then we look at some other newspapers from across the continent. We start with The Nation from Nigeria. President-elect, election is over, it's time for healing. Declare me winner or cancel election, Obi urges tribunal. And then Atiku, Obi to others ask tribunal to nullify Tinubu's victory. And then the Punch newspaper, protest rock Ogun, Abia, Nasarawa over poll results. Adebutu Kano APC candidate ask INEC to declare elections inconclusive. A Labour Party groups want Abia, Enugu, Logiam resolved, or soon Oyo tribunals get 34 petitions over the just concluded governorship, elections. And I did not interfere in polls. Results reflected Nigerians' choices, says Buhari. Why does he have to keep defending himself? Let INEC and the courts sort out this matter and let the case that have been filed play out in the court. You don't had any court there, President Buhari. If anything, you served your term, good 8 years. You're leaving now. Why you have to keep defending INEC? It's just adding to a lot of speculation that have been rife. Just let this process play out through the legal institutions that are handling this right now, the cases that have been submitted to the courts. Let the court hear them, make the determination based on the facts and what will be presented, the evidence, and then the country will move on. But you keep talking about this and defending INEC. You know that's not going to augur well. That's not going to augur well. I wonder why you have to keep defending INEC. But anyway, Daily Trust also from Nigeria. Defeated candidates reject results in Kano, Lagos, Bauchi, Delta, and others. And then 4 hurdles Zamfara governor-elect skilled to unseat Matawale. The Daily Monitor from Uganda. MPs return death penalty for gays. Very well. Okay. I'd like to see if Uganda will face some sanctions and all these things from the US and these other countries. I'm really watching to see, if at all they will take some measures over this new bill, because they like to prefect us here in Africa on how to look at some things and how to address some issues, and they're all involved. But President Museveni and the MPs there in Uganda and Ugandans have stood their ground over this matter. And they believe, however they believe, and now it was being debated yesterday in Parliament. And the law, once it's passed, is going to be one of the most punitive laws against the LGBTQ communities across Africa. And so it will be interesting to see how that will play out there and how the international community will respond. The last time, President Magufuli, also made the late president of Tanzania, took a stand over some of these issues, and also the denying our teenagers mothers a right to go back to school, and then his stand on homosexuality. What happened is money was pulled from Tanzania. IMF was supposed to be giving Tanzania a loan, and that was cancelled. Some money were meant to be going to aiding high school education. That was cancelled. I'd like to see how they respond to this one. So anyway, news today from Zimbabwe. ZANU-PF supporters bash each other. The Daily News as well from Zimbabwe. It is game on in ZANU-PF voting. And then the Daily News as well. This one from Tanzania. Samia wins investors' hearts. I love this lady. Oh, she's been working tirelessly. She's very careful and I think very intentional in how she chooses to be involved or involve Tanzania on certain issues, but she does it in a way that it does not affect or cause any kind of effect in how she's running the country. In every move she makes, she's very strategic, and we can see, now with the current reforms she's been making and the current, just departing a bit from what Magufuli used to do and just trying to craft her own leadership in this way. And some of the changes she's been making, she has sacked a lot of people in different parastatals who have been accused of corruption. She has really made a lot of changes in Tanzania, and it seems to be working. So because of these new moves and some of these policies also she has introduced, it seems to be attractive now for even foreign investors to come and invest in Tanzania. Foreign direct investment is very important, and the only way you're going to get the FDI, the foreign direct investment, from any foreign investor, one of them is if, of course, the conditions are favorable, but also the stability of the country is very, very important. Remember, Tanzania had gotten to the levels where some freedoms are being infringed. The opposition was not alive in Tanzania. Magufuli was very harsh, and I do agree with certain things that he did and his spirit of Pan-Africanism, but he became increasingly intolerant, I think, to the opposition, and that costed Tanzania's economy a bit. But President Suluhu seems to be quite a wise lady here, and some of the changes she's making, she's still not totally departing. And I think the gesture that she did on Women's Day, instead of her being a woman and the president of Tanzania, organizing for her own event and celebrating the women in Tanzania, she instead opted to go and grace an event that had been organized by the opposition. How many times can you ever see that happening here across Africa? So I love her spirit, of course, of unity, and I think she does understand her position as the head of state, and one of the key functions of a head of state is to be a unifying factor of a country. And I think President Suluhu has really fitted this bill so well. And her humility, I think, also is quite attractive. But she's a very wise lady, and she knows how to just move the chess the right way. Okay, she knows how to play around and how to make the right decisions for the country. And you can see that her just preaching about unity and inclusivity in Tanzania is not just by mere words and mere rhetoric. She actually tries to lead by example, and that has gone a long way in bringing stability back in Tanzania. Tanzania has always been stable compared to other countries across even this region. But during Magufuli time, we saw scenes that we never thought we would see in Tanzania. Our oppositions being targeted. One of them almost died and was flown here in Kenya for treatment, and then he went into he sought asylum in a different country. So things were beginning to happen that was even worrying us because Tanzanians are known to be quite calm in nature, and it's just as a people. So that was worrying, but it appears Madame Suluhu is keen on working on that and making sure that Tanzania is stable so that they can continue in winning the hearts of investors, as we see now on the Daily News. Samia wins investors' hearts, and I think the efforts that she has been making, not too much politicking, wise lady. So this has made investors say, you know what, between Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya, and maybe Rwanda and Burundi, which country do I need to go make my investment in? And apparently most of them will go to Tanzania. Why? I don't know. But apparently what she's been doing has been working. But anyway, the Citizen, also from Tanzania. Development, IFC Regional Director lists focus areas. And then LPG imports rise 13-fold in 10 years. And then there's a bat there. No let up, says defiant Raila as hundreds arrested in Kenya. Okay. So EAC plans to fast-track political federation, also that is there, and how local airlines fared in 2021 and 2022. And by the way, the Citizen newspaper of Tanzania is sister newspaper to the Daily Nation here in Kenya, and the Daily Monitor, is it the Daily Monitor or the New Vision? The Daily Monitor of Uganda is also a sister newspaper to the Daily Nation in Kenya. So their mother countries in Kenya. So anyway, the New Times, this is from Rwanda. Over 3.5 billion people vulnerable to climate hazards. And then Kagame in Doha on a working visit. Okay, so this working visit, Kagame sneaked into Doha. The working visit is because, you know, Carter had offered to help in coming in and helping the mediation in the DRC conflict, because, you know, Rwanda has been accused to be involved in that conflict and to be supporting the M23 rebels. And so it's not a coincidence that Kagame has gone to Doha. And one of the key things that he's going there to discuss, of course he can't come out outrightly to tell us, is the issue to do with the DRC conflict. So I think Qatar there is taking lead as the helping in mediation. But I think at the end of the day, what is the interest that Qatar has? Do you think Qatar will just sit and decide, you know what, that conflict in East Africa is destabilizing that region so much, and a lot of people are dying, so let's just come in and be good people and just, you know, try and bring peace in this part of East Africa? No, it's because Qatar also has a lot of interest there in the DRC, it and perhaps some of its allies, and for it offering itself to come in and help in the mediation, I think this will only complicate matters. And why would we trust Qatar to help broker a peace or to help broker a way forward in this mediation? While we saw the kinds of mediation they've been helping across the world, remember that one of Taliban. Taliban's had their headquarters in Qatar, still do, and the US and other countries that were trying to broker peace and find a way forward in Afghanistan. Finally, it didn't work. Taliban's went and they took over Afghanistan. So how can we trust Qatar as a peace guarantor? I think that's the big question. And what is Qatar up to I know Qatar has been really trying to whitewash itself and to really cleanse itself against some of these accusations that have been labeled against it by Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries over its involvement. It was accused of supporting some extremist groups and having them in the country. But we know there's been some also, supremacy battles in the Gulf countries. So everything that perhaps, information you get from there and these accusations, some of them, you take them with a pinch of salt. But because there are also interests that are being jostled up in the Gulf. So it's interesting. It's interesting, but I think Qatar is really trying to outdo itself. And we saw by its hosting the most controversial World Cup in the history of the World Cups last year, Qatar got a new status that some of its neighbors like Saudi Arabia is just coveting and really wants, and Qatar seems to be winning. Qatar is the first Arab country that has a television station that seems to be have captured the global audience in the name of Al Jazeera. Saudi Arabia does not have that. Qatar seems to be a bit laxed when it comes to even tourism, and it's trying to put itself up as a cosmopolitan country that, as much as they do have their traditions and cultures and religion, but they're also open to other people visiting there, compared to a country like Saudi Arabia. And it's not very stringent in Qatar compared to, Saudi Arabia and these other countries. So Qatar seems to be winning this public relations stand and this whitewashing, and this is angering other Gulf countries. And now you see it's bringing itself into the space of peace, mediator, and it wants to get itself in this conflict in East Africa that has really gone on for a very long time. And any mediation process that has been ongoing have not seemed to be bearing any fruit. But the problem with having these external factors now coming into play, already we do have others at play right now, but if you're bringing additional external actors who are coming in with other interests, then this might be counterproductive, because usually what happens, they will come in and now they'll start their proxy wars, and now it will not be about the conflict that they're supposed to be solving of the DRC. And that becomes, it is the supremacy battle which will be at play. It is their interest which will be at play, and that becomes counterproductive. So I still believe strongly that the issue of the Democratic Republic of Congo, this is something that should have been left to say what already our former President Uhuru Kenyatta had already started the mediation process, but left to the Africans, to the East Africans, and to other Africans, the African Union, which, okay. But, just be left for us to try and find a solution, because if anything, we understand better the escarpment, we understand better the terrain of that conflict, and so it will be prudent for these external actors to just be left out of this process, so that we see how we can actually find a solution for ourselves in this conflict, because external actors sometimes only act to add more complexities in a conflict that is already too complex, so they come in with other things, and now the focal point shifts. Now we have to deal with the sideshows. Now we have to deal with other interests. Now we have to deal with one country not agreeing with the other one and giving conditions and all these things. We can't do that. We really can't do that. So I'd like to laud that, but I don't think it will be good for Africa. So President Paul Kagame is in Doha, in Qatar, and I can assure you, one of the key reasons for that visit has to do with the Democratic Republic of Congo's visit. Tshisekedi will follow suit. Did he already go? But he will follow suit very soon. You wait for it. You wait for it. Qatar is really trying to posture itself as a mediator, and China as well. I wouldn't be surprised for China to come and offer to take up this mediation process. If anything, this conflict is really hampering its ambition. The Belt and what is it called? Its ambitious project to connect Africa, from East Africa all the way to the other side of Africa, and this is inhibiting its ambition. And so I wouldn't be surprised. I was telling you about that peace process that China brokered between Saudi Arabia and Iran over close to 2 weeks ago. And these are countries that had severed the diplomatic ties for over 7 years after Saudi Arabia's embassy was attacked in Iran. And because Saudi Arabia had executed a key cleric that was, I think, of one side of the Muslim, sect. They have the Shias and the Sunnis. It's a whole thing, and each country is supporting whichever side. And so that has been a contentious issue. So that caused a lot of problem, and that problem, sprang over to other countries in the Gulf. You see Yemen, you see Lebanon, you hear of the Houthi rebels, you hear of Hezbollah. So each side has been supporting either of these. So that conflict really has played into, it is a sectarian conflict. So by, China being able to broker that peace on the agreement that was signed, I think it really brought China to the fore, because this is something that the Western world have tried to work through, but they have not been successful. So now China also is taking up that position that initially it was just playing a second fiddle, because the US really dominated the politics in the Middle East, but now things seems to be changing. And because of its approaches and flip-flopping and hypocrisy, I think those countries, especially Saudi Arabia, seems to be just, distancing itself from the US, and they seem to be warming up to China. And China is really strategically working its way towards dominating international politics, and that is a worry to the US. Where did we start this story for us to get all the way to China being a mediator of Saudi Arabia and Iran conflict? All right, back to that headline. That is what triggered all this conversation of Kagame in Doha. It's just international relations or international system. It's just world politics, and they're all interconnected either way. So it's all good. So hopefully after that we'll see a new date being set for a meeting between President Paul Kagame and President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Felix Tshisekedi, and we'll see if at all this mediation process that I've told, if we can have them move forward and a solution be gotten. Okay, the Sowetan, that is from South Africa, why we don't have top policing daily. Okay, that is what we have in some of the newspapers. Let me go quickly in some of the papers from the UK. The Mirror, Boris's Partygate excuses. So they're all there. I don't know whose handwriting was that. I guess it's Boris. So it's giving 7 excuses, according to the Daily Mirror, why that party happened under the COVID-19. And iNewspaper, D-Day for Johnson, ex-Prime Minister drags Sunak into inquiry as he fights to save his political career. The Guardian, Johnson faces fight for political survival at Partygate hearing. The Daily Telegraph, hypocrite, stammer to avoid tax on pension. The Daily Express, Boris ready for battle. I acted in good faith. That's what he is saying there. All right, very well. So before we look at, all right, let's just go to the weather quickly. And the conditions today in Johannesburg, it's going to be mostly sunny with highs of 27 degrees Celsius and lows of 13 degrees Celsius. And in Nairobi, it's going to be mostly cloudy with highs of 26 degrees Celsius and lows of 17 degrees Celsius. And there will be isolated thunderstorms in Accra with highs of 31 degrees Celsius and lows of 24 degrees Celsius. And in Dakar, it's going to be partly cloudy with highs of 23 degrees Celsius and lows of 19 degrees Celsius. And in Abuja, Nigeria, it's going to be mostly cloudy with highs of 34 degrees Celsius and lows of 23 degrees Celsius. In Kinshasa, that is in DRC, highs of 32 degrees Celsius and lows of 23 degrees Celsius. And it is going to be mostly cloudy there in Kinshasa, and then in Khartoum it's going to be sunny with highs of 34 degrees Celsius and lows of 18 degrees Celsius. And let me see, Addis Ababa, highs of 24 degrees Celsius and lows of 13 degrees Celsius, and it's going to be mostly cloudy there in Addis Ababa. So that is your weather update this morning. And also let's look at some a sport item here quickly. And the Brazilian squad arrived in Tangier in Morocco on Monday for a friendly match that is meant to be happening on Saturday the 25th against the Atlas Lions, who finished fourth in the last World Cup, an historic feat for an African team. It will be the third face-off for the two teams 25 years after they last played each other. The squads will clash in a packed Ibn Battuta Stadium. The two selections have opposite momentums. If Morocco lived a legendary World Cup odyssey, Brazil exited the tournament in the quarterfinals after a shootout session. Not a shout-out, definitely a shootout. It's football, right? Brazilians will present themselves with a renewed squad. In the absence of the dribbles of the injured Neymar, and the Moroccan fans will be able to admire Antony's trademark spin skill. Andre Fluminense midfielder is one of the newly called into the team, and it is, according to him, the beginning of a new project. That is what he said in the press conference. Now, interim coach Ramos Menez will do his best to field a competitive team at the Ibn Battuta Stadium. He'll face Morocco's Walid Regragui. The tactician should be rather confident, since only 4 of the World Cup heroes will miss the game, namely Bada Benon, Selim Amala, Ilyas Chair and Yaya Jabrin. The remaining first-team players will be on the pitch, eager for an expansive reunion with their public. This is the only third time in history that the two teams have faced each other, after first match in 1997 and a second one a year later during the World Cup in France. And each time the Orivard won against the band of Mustafa Haji and all that. And so what I'm trying to say, using all this football language, is that Morocco and Brazil national teams are meant to be playing on Saturday. So look out for that match. I don't know if you're still conflicted in the continent, if you still need to support Morocco as one of our team, or I don't know how you feel about that. It's always a controversy when it comes to Morocco, because they don't feel very African, and so they're more Arab. In fact, that's how they identify themselves. And I guess maybe God just placed them in this continent by a fold. That's what they believe. But anyway, they shall be playing Brazil on Saturday. So I guess that is a match that many are looking to watch in the continent. And on a bit of culture today, Egypt's Fashion and Design Council on Tuesday announced that the country's first ever fashion week at a press conference in the capital, Cairo, is about to happen. And it will take place in May. The opening night will be held in the Cairo Egyptian Museum and feature the work of prominent Egyptian designers. This first edition will have as theme the past, present and future, with Egyptian culture long having been an inspiration for international designers. The organizers say it is the right time for the country to hold its own fashion event, and I say yes to that. I think it will be very interesting for Egypt to host its first ever fashion week. We normally see New York Fashion Week, London Fashion Week, and all these fashion weeks, Paris Fashion Week, and all this, where designers from across the world go there to showcase their talent and their designs. And a lot of this design sometimes we see capturing the rich culture of Egypt, Cleopatra and all that. They've become an inspiration to some designers worldwide. And so I think Egypt having its first edition of this such a event, I think it's good. And of course, it stands to gain as far as just tourism and the many people who troop in the country. We should have a lot of other African countries embracing this, so that we can showcase our cultures, our designs to the world at home, not carrying our stuff to New York to be showcased there. It's nice and it's amazing, but if you can have more of these events, in different African countries, I think it will be a good thing where we can showcase our talents, our culture, and everything beautiful about Africa. So I think kudos to Egypt on this one, and so I will be looking forward to see what Egypt has for us and what the world has to present while they will be visiting Egypt during this very fast, important, fashion week in Africa, or in Egypt rather. All right, so that is that. Now let's get into the serious business. Not that that is not serious, but hey, let's go to Nigeria now. And the latest is that candidates who lost Saturday's governorship election and their supporters on Tuesday protested the outcome of the poll and vowed to challenge the results in court. There were protests by the People's Democratic Party supporters in Ogun and Nasarawa states, just as the All Progressive Congress in Kano State gave the Independent National Electoral Commission 7 days to declare the governorship election in the state inconclusive. In the results of the governorship election declared so far by INEC, the APC has won 15 states, the PDP won 8, while the New Nigerian People's Party emerged victorious in Kano State. A protest by the PDP members in Ogun State turned violent when an official of the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps fired a gunshot into the air to disperse protesters who stormed the INEC office in Abeokuta, the state capital. Now, scores of the PDP members, led by the party's candidate Oladipupo Adebutu, had marched to the INEC offices where they rejected the result of the election, which Adebutu lost to the state governor, Dapo Abiodun, who is the APC candidate. Now, pandemonium, however, broke out when the security operatives prevented the party members from entering the premises. And during the confusion, an NSCDC official fired a gunshot in an attempt to disperse the protesters. The angry protesters pursued and pelted him with stones as he ran away when they angrily advanced towards him. Some security personnel, including officials of the Department of State Services, were injured during the mayhem. The protesters, who were singing anti-INEC songs, bearing placards with inscriptions such as "INEC should save our democracy," "INEC betrayed the people of Ogun," and then others also said electoral fraud will not stand, and others also carried placards saying INEC should respect people's wishes, INEC should stop being biased, and the Ogun election was inconclusive, INEC correct yourself, among others. I mean, they were really, really angry. That's what I'm trying to tell you. But the protesters were denied access to the INEC office by heavily armed security operatives. And speaking at the entrance of the office, Adebutu said he was at the commission to submit a petition. He insisted that the protesters would not leave the place until officials of the Electoral Commission attended to them. Adebutu said the party had submitted several protest letters to the commission during the review of the results of Saturday election and rerun in polling units where elections were either cancelled or disrupted. So the problems of INEC seems not to have gone away. And I think INEC had postponed the gubernatorial elections with a week so that it would be allowed time to go reconfigure the beavers and all that, so that it could be ready to give Nigerians a credible election. But it appears that was not the case in some instances, as some Nigerians are feeling. Those changes did not reflect. There were some instances, according to the reports that we've been reading from Nigeria and watching, that perhaps even some of these machines failed, and the issue of transparency is also coming to the fore again, and rigging and all these things that marred the presidential election. So maybe INEC did not have enough time to correct the problems that it had experienced during the presidential petition, which, by the way, had been filed yesterday, has already been filed, but I don't want us to get into the details of it. It will form the subject of our conversation at 3 p.m. East African time, so that's why I don't have it here with me, because I want us to have a a deeper conversation, just looking at the issues that these candidates, I think, what do you call him, Atiku and Obi, and I think 2 others, is it 2 or 4 others, what they've said in these petitions. I want us to look at these issues in details in the afternoon, so we are not going to touch on that. But we are looking at the protest over the governorship elections that happened over the weekend. INEC seems not to have learned so much, and its officials who were heading these elections in different parts of Nigeria, as we see now. After that, yesterday there were protests, and I think more is expected. And so I don't know how INEC will be able to redeem itself. How INEC is going to inspire confidence on the people, even as the results that it released over the presidential results have been challenged in court, and even a lot of these other elections also, the results of them have been challenged in court. So it is going to be quite something as we wait for the court process to play out, and then the winners declared and cleared for those whose win are being challenged, and especially the presidential elections, which we will have that conversation later on in the afternoon. So this is just the scenes that marks, African elections, and it's quite sad over how we choose to do some of these things in the continent. So the petitioners are also asking the tribunal for an order cancelling the election and compelling INEC to conduct fresh elections. But I think this is mostly on the presidential elections, and so that we shall look at 3 p.m. where it's, I think, Obi, Atiku and 2 others who have filed a petition together, a petition together. And on top of that, President Buhari now has rejected a bill empowering NSSS to summon president. Now the Senate President, Ahmad Lawan, has stated the Senate will investigate the 19 constitutional alternative bills rejected by the President, retired General Muhammadu Buhari. Lawan made this unknown during a plenary on Tuesday. The National Assembly had in January transmitted 35 constitutional alterations bills to the President for assent, but Buhari had on Friday last week assented to 16 out of the 35 bills. Lawan noted that the most striking of the 16 bills that Buhari assented to was the 5th Alteration Bill number 6, which makes provisions for financial independence of State House or Assembly. So he's saying, any money that is allocated to State House and the National Assembly, that is independent, so maybe should not be subject to for accountability, and so that he ascended to. But the first of the 19 bills rejected by Buhari was the 5th Alteration Bill number 24, which sought an act to alter the second schedule to the 1999 Constitution to empower the National Assembly and State Houses of Assembly to summon the President and governors to answer questions on issues on which the National and State Houses of Assembly have the powers to make. Okay, so what Buhari rejected is the bill that would require the President to show up in Parliament and go through questioning in Parliament, which I think, I don't know, that's why you have ministers who should be responsible. But they're saying that the President, and the governors should be summoned in Parliament for questioning. And so that is just one of the bills that President Buhari rejected. And the rejected was Alteration Bill number 7, which sought an act to alter the provisions of 1999 Constitution to compel obedience or compliance with legislative summons. So also rejected was the 5th Alteration Bill number 29, which sought for an act to alter the provisions of the 1999 Constitution to provide for a State of the Nation and State of the State address by the President and the Governor. So they want to remove that? Okay, let me move further. Also rejected was the 5th Alteration Bill number 22, which sought an act to alter the provisions of the 1999 Constitution to specify the period within which the President or the Governor of the state shall present the appropriation bill before the National Assembly or House of Assembly. So these bills that were rejected, and much of them have to do with the touch on the President's responsibilities, I believe. And of course, one of them up there that was suggesting that the president should be appearing, should be summoned in parliament to answer. I think on that, I might not fault President Buhari so much. Understanding our politics and the nature of our politics, sometimes putting yourselves in positions. Of course, the president is meant to be holding perhaps press conferences and issuing, statements every now and then over important issues. But also the ministries are there for that reason. So perhaps what Parliament should be looking at is to summon these ministers in Parliament and to query them and question them over government policies and positions on certain issues. I think that will be prudent. But having the president come up there every now and then and knowing the nature of politics and how it can get very murky and very targeted, I think maybe that will not be very safe, not just for Buhari, but even for the next president, because maybe when some of these bills are being amended there, maybe these people had President Buhari in mind, but President Buhari is leaving. I mean, he's just counting days, and the inauguration is meant to be happening in May. After that, he'll be done. So let's look at some of these things. When you craft a constitution and when you amend these constitutions, I think sometimes we fail to understand that we're doing this for the prosperity, for the future of the country, for the betterment of the future of legislation, of constitution. We are strengthening the constitution for the betterment of the future of the country. But sometimes we are very short-sighted that what we see is right now and who is in that position and how can we get back at this person. But your people will come to power and then you'll go back to amending that bill again, and what will happen? So I don't think it is prudent, owing to the nature of our politics. I know we see in the UK, we see the Prime Minister in Parliament all the time being questioned and, the rowdiness you're seeing play out. But at the end of the day, they're a little bit civilized over there. And I think the Prime Minister position is quite different compared to perhaps the President's position here in Africa. But the nature of our politics, I think, this will not be held. Why don't you have the Deputy President maybe come in Parliament and answer? Must you really have the president? But I would insist that some of these things, the ministries, that is what they are mandated to do. That is, they are the ones who are implementing government policies. The government just sits, the president sits with its leadership, and they decide on things that they want to do and the decisions that they're making. But some of these things are implemented through the ministries. That is the works of the ministries, to implement the policies of the government of the day. So the ministers who are heading these dockets, depending on what issue you want to inquire about, I think the right people to be showing up in Parliament whenever you need some issues cleared up, and having a communication from the head of state, and they will come and they will answer these questions. But demanding that the president be appearing in Parliament for these live sessions, I think you're asking for too much. Can you imagine the current president you're having in Nigeria? President-elect, what is his name again? I've forgotten. Tinubu, all right? Can you imagine him being in Parliament? First of all, halfway through his answering this speech, he'll probably fall asleep, and I'm not even being funny. Or halfway, you saw in Chatham House, when the questions were being posed to him, Tinubu decided, I'm too tired to talk. So he was speaking on some of his aides to answer and respond to these very important inquiries that were being made and questions that were being posed, because probably it's not his forte. So he couldn't do that. So that is a sign that if you were to put Tinubu through this, should he be cleared and the cases that have been filed against him be nullified by the court and he be sworn in as the president of Nigeria, then can you imagine him sitting there every now and then? He's in Parliament and you want him to answer to these questions over some of the things. I think it's important, but there are channels and ways by which you could still get statements and you could still get government's response on certain matters without necessarily having the president come to Parliament every now and then. And I'm thinking they might abuse that process as well. Should that be passed as law? Obviously, we'll abuse. There are people who will just be wanting to do that for fun. Let's just bother this old person, have him come to Parliament all the time. And let's just, waste his time, And Tinubu Should he be, cleared? He's already tired. Yeah, he's already tired. So he probably will be working with his aides, who will be helping in answering some of these questions that you could be having. So that's why I think it will be prudent for you to be make a provision in the law that requires that the ministers, when they're summoned in Parliament, to appear and answer on behalf of the president and behalf of the government. And if needs be, then have his deputy there, not the president. Let's have some level of respect, I think, for the head of state. It is important, but also I think this is quite emotive. Can you imagine Buhari? If no wonder he couldn't even append to this. He was always in and out of Nigeria seeking for treatment. Half the time we didn't even know where he was. He could go MIA for a long period of time. So you want him to appear in Parliament to come talk about Boko Haram and insecurity, while in his mind, he thinks his government already dealt with the issue of Boko Haram long time ago. He's not even aware that these people are causing mayhem. That is to tell you that Buhari has been busy seeking for treatment and has been on medication. He's so unaware of what has been happening in the country, and I'm not making this stuff up. You've seen how he's been quite aloof with how he has handled certain issues. And part of that is because he's not been okay. He's not been 100%. I think because of age and maybe other factors. He's not been at the best as far as his health is concerned. So he was in and out of the country. And now you want him. I think that is the point the MPs will be like, you cancel that doctor's appointment to the UK. We need you in Parliament because of this and that and the others. So I think such a process will be abused. And so in our setting here, anywhere else it could work. But in Africa, especially Nigeria, or even bring that in Uganda and expect President Museveni to be appearing in Parliament, to be answering to your questions. First of all, that would be hilarious, because I'd want to see him do that. And second, you will not have anything addressed at all. So have the ministers, people who understand these ministries, people who have the mandate to run these ministries, Nigerians, to being summoned to Parliament and to answer on behalf of the government. That's why you have these ministries and these ministers with these hefty portfolios. That's why they are paid. So those are the people you need to have there in Parliament. And also, President Buhari rejected Bill number 14, which sought an act to alter the 1999 Constitution to move fingerprints, identification, and criminal records from the executive legislative list to the concurrent legislative list. Okay. And then what else did he refuse to? So he refused to append to that. But I think the key thing is that President Buhari, has rejected the alterations of the Constitution. He did that yesterday. He was supposed to append to 35 of those alterations. He only appended to a few, about 16 bills that Buhari assented to. And one of them was the alteration bill number 6, which makes provincial for financial independence of state houses. Financial independence. I'm not surprised that he did that. All right. So it's not subject to accountability there. See? And Buhari there is quite sneaky with the things that he decides to. But he does not want the head of state to be followed after he has retired. So he has rejected that, the National Assembly, empowering the National Assembly to summon the president. So to some extent, I do agree with that because of our the nature of our constitution. But on the other hand, I think there should also be ways by which the government is held accountable. So I've said there's a petition that was filed yesterday challenging the win of President-elect Tinubu, and by Atiku Abubakar, by Peter Obi, and 2 others. And the details of that we shall be discussing here at 3 p.m. So let's move quickly to other news that I'd like to bring to your attention this morning, and we go to Sudan. An influential Sudanese political faction condemned Monday the plan by the country's military and the main pro-democracy forces to establish a transitional government despite lack of consensus. The timeline unveiled on Sunday that I was talking to you about here yesterday, that a new civilian-led government will be formed next month. The faction known as the Democratic Bloc includes Sudan's Finance Minister Jibril Ibrahim and the Governor of Darfur, Minawi, among numerous other smaller political figures and parties. The controversial framework agreement was signed in early December under the international pressure. The controversial framework agreement was signed. The deal pledged to establish a civilian-led transitional government to lead the country to elections despite thorny issues that remain unresolved. Supporters of the agreement welcomed the move, offering a path forward in the wake of Sudan's stalled transition to democracy following the October 2021 coup. And the woes of Sudan continue. Let's look at another news also, this time from Tunisia. And the country has dismissed concerns expressed by the European Union's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, warning of a looming economic collapse in the country. Mr. Borrell said on Monday that a very dangerous situation was developing in which new flows of migrants would head from North African country to Southern Europe. Tunisia's foreign ministry described the comments as overblown. Italy, which lies just north of Tunis, has expressed its fears of a Tunisian collapse. On Tuesday, the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, the extremist Prime Minister, said that Rome was making every effort to ensure a proposed $2 billion IMF loan for Tunisia goes ahead. See, Tunisia is very smart. If you want to get what you need from them, then make sure you set the migrants free and let them attempt to access Europe where they're not wanted. So the Italian Prime Minister is saying, oh no, we need to appease Tunisia very quickly because this Kais Saied does not even want these black people in his country. So he will let them come access Europe, and of course because of our proximity to Africa, that is Italy, so we will suffer by having these sub-Saharan Africans coming to our country. Never mind the other immigrants from Algeria and other countries, right? And so she's saying she will do all she can. And maybe this is the game that President Kais Saied has been playing all along. I didn't know that he had asked for this kind of help. $2 billion. $2 billion. That's a lot of money Tunisia has been seeking to have. And so I think now he will get that. President Kais Saied will get that, because anything that will help in keeping these sub-Saharan African immigrants in their countries not crossing over to Europe, I think that is something that especially Meloni will support. You know her stance, quite extremist. She is far, far, far right. All right? She, Marie Le Pen and Trump, they belong to the same WhatsApp group in their belief in certain things, and especially the issues of immigration. So yeah, I believe she will do all she can to ensure that this loan goes ahead, so that they can, perhaps Tunisia can respect. It's part of the bargain to make sure that not many of these sub-Saharan Africans cross over to Europe. I tell you, I'm laughing, but it's not funny. All right, so Eritrea has joined Ethiopia in accusing the United States of unfairly apportioning blame for crimes committed during 2 years of civil war in the Tigray region. On Monday, the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Amara regional forces had committed crimes against humanity, but he did not accuse the rebel Tigray People's Liberation Front of this crime. He did accuse the TPLF of war crimes, along with other parties in the conflict. Eritrea said the allegations were defamatory. Really? Now, the Ethiopian Foreign Ministry described the U.S. approach as partisan, ill-advised, and unwarranted. Anthony Blinken made his first visit to Ethiopia last week since a peace deal was signed in November last year between the federal government and the Tigrayan forces, and I think I criticized that visit. He went there and before he even went there, there are some NGOs that were already pushing Blinken to one of the key things that they wanted him to discuss with the Ethiopian government was the issue of accountability. And so he was pushing They were pushing for him to do that, but he seems to have been just skating around the issue. He did not directly say it while they were holding that press conference. Instead, he enjoyed the coffee, as you can see there. Then after that, he had come also with a gift to reward impunity. That's exactly what that is, because he said the U.S. was going to give grant to Ethiopia, I think over $300 million to Ethiopia for rebuilding. Remember when the war started, or in the course of the war, the 2-year war that ended in November last year, the U.S. removed Ethiopia in their AGOA countries who were beneficiaries of AGOA, the free market, deal between Africans and some African countries and the U.S. So they removed Ethiopia. That meant that Ethiopian manufacturers or industries suffered a bit because of that. But look, they did not lose anything, because whatever they lost, the U.S. is bringing back. No problem. Rewarding impunity. So you can't be rewarding impunity on one hand, and then on the other hand, you're here telling us now Ethiopia committed atrocities and all sides are responsible, and yet you're giving money to the same government. That is double standards. That is hypocritical. You can't do both. You have to choose. Are we asking for accountability? Are we asking for reparations? Are we asking, what is it? All right? You can't be rewarding them on one hand and supporting them, and at the same time coming up and saying now that both sides committed atrocities. Of course, both sides committed atrocities. So Ethiopia and Eritrea come out and accused the United States of unfairly apportioning blame for crimes committed. All these parties, and I think I was reading that, I was going through that press conference and what Blinken said. I didn't see that the U.S. apportioned anybody particular and left the other out. I think all parties, he mentioned Amara, he mentioned the TPLF, Eritrean forces, Ethiopian federal forces. And he said, the US said all of these parties were responsible for the atrocities that took place in the Tigray region. And so Ethiopia is coming out and saying, no, in fact, we did not even participate. Get out of town. And Isaias Afwerki is also coming out and saying, no, this is not true. This cannot be true. Yeah. And so they're saying these crimes that they're being accused of. So on Monday, the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Amara regional forces committed crimes against humanity. Okay? And he did accuse the TPLF of war crimes, along with other parties in the conflict. And the U.S. was relying on some investigations by, I think, teams that they really, credible, that perhaps were taking on taking note on what was happening in Ethiopia at that time. And I think that region was under heavy blockade, but they were able to gather this information. So Ethiopia is saying no. So Ethiopia, I think at this point, is just confused, because Anthony Blinken was in the country last week. He did not say anything. He praised the US's commitment, and he reiterated the diplomatic relations and how they're going to strengthen it. And then I wondered, why would you say that when you are building a country that is just recovering? Part of it is recovering. You're just visiting a country whose part of it is just recovering from a conflict that the leadership of that country was accused of participating in, or not accused, participated in, for whatever reasons that were present at that time. And they're trying now to rebuild, but you will not speak about accountability. And then she didn't bring that up in a strong worded way. You left. And then when you get to the US, now you have the, I almost used a bad word. Now you have the confidence. You have the confidence to now tell the world and point a finger at Ethiopia. You should have done that while you were in Ethiopia last week, Anthony Blinken. If at all that was US's position on this matter, and you strongly believe in whatever it is that you say. You were in Ethiopia last week. You should have looked at Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed on the face and said, your government was wrong on this. These are the sides of actors who participated on this conflict was also wrong on this. But you couldn't gather yourself. You couldn't gather the confidence to do that. Why didn't you do that? Instead, you said, we are here, and I did not just show up here. I also came with some gifts to the country and to the leadership of Ethiopia. and I'm just here to reward impunity. That's how I look at it, and I could be wrong. I do agree the Tigray region needs to be rebuilt. A lot of things were destroyed, schools, hospitals, name it. There needs to be a rebuilding. But for US to come and speak on one side of its mouth and also do something different on the other side, it is confusing. And it is this flip-flopping that US keeps doing when it comes to the role that it gave itself as the superpower of the world and the prefect of the world. That is how now China, Russia, Japan, India now is really coming up. It's really overtaking some other countries. Other countries are finding this gap that the US not being able to offer proper leadership, and they're coming in and taking advantage and filling this gap. And that's why you see even the traditional allies of the US are now tired of this flip-flopping and are just turning to other countries like China, and they're seeking for leadership and strengthen their partnership, because the US's role is slowly being diminished, and that is because of its lack of what do you call it? They are not consistent with the messaging. They're not consistent in how they're dealing with issues, the hypocrisy, the double standards. And I think the world is getting tired of this, and they're saying, but why should we look up to a country which even its own democracy is under threat? Why should they tell us about democracy? Why should we look at a leadership who is talking to us about democracy and strong institutions in the continent, while they will not have a problem with holding this African leaders summit with the US and still have some of the most atrocious leaders from the African continent attend this meeting without a problem? They had every leader in this continent apart from 5 countries. Eritrea, they consider that a pariah state. They don't even count it as a state. The US doesn't. So Sudan could not attend, Guinea could not attend, Burkina Faso could not attend, Mali could not attend because of the, or not represented because of the cause. But the rest of the other countries that have the worst leaders in the continent were able to attend this meeting. So if the US is really serious about this issue of accountability and the issues to do with human rights abuses and the issues to do with war crimes and all these things that is saying Ethiopia was of course this happened in Ethiopia, so I don't know why Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is coming out and refuting and denying. These things happen. There has been some documentations. So perhaps what you should be working through right now as Ethiopians is just trying to find a way of healing and moving forward, but not coming out and denying that this did not happen. Well, there are people who are still suffering. There are people who will forever have the trauma from that unnecessary conflict that happened in that country. So stop denying. That is a spit on the face of the victims who went through these hard times, through this conflict in your country. And as the head of state, whatever you say, I think is very important. And to some degree, you must take responsibility and you must admit, even if part of that responsibility will not mean some people will go to jail, but the government has to take up responsibility. Other sides also must take up their responsibility so that you can honestly rebuild and move forward as a country. Now, how you choose to approach the issue of accountability, that I think should be left to the people of Ethiopia to decide in a manner that will heal them and unite them and move them forward. But the US, no, you have to choose and pick. You cannot be on both sides. You cannot be condemning impunity. You cannot be condemning abuses. You cannot be sanctioning leaders over these issues, but you go to other countries and you don't do the same. And you're rewarding even some of these things that happened. You have to choose and pick. And it is this double speak that I think the world is increasingly getting tired with about the US and its Western allies. And they're quickly moving to other powers. And now we're seeing people posturing themselves and wanting to fill up this gap that the US is creating. So it's up to it to really see how it operates within the international system. Otherwise, its influence is slowly eroding because of its lack of consistency in certain issues and how it chooses to apply these things across board. It is not uniform. It's just cherry picking, depending on its interest, and and we can see it, and countries can see it. And they're saying, no, we don't want to be involved. Let us foster better relations with China. Let us foster better relations with India, with with Russia, with whatever country, but not you, because you are not consistent and you cannot be trusted. With the words that you give, you keep flip-flopping on your positions. You can't take a position and stand by it. You can't stand on a position about an issue and protect it and defend it, despite of what country or what players are involved. But you flip-flop your stand on the same issue depending on what country is being affected and what players are being mentioned and are part of that. So that is the problem we have. But US's position as a superpower is really under threat. So they're doing all they can to ensure that they're able to still, keep the momentum and protect their interest and strengthen their influence. But we'll see how that will work in the long run. I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. There's a story that I haven't gotten time to do, but I think it's important, and I could just do it. I don't think we have another show at 11. I could just go through it quickly. All right. Now, Kenyan President William Ruto wants the treaty establishing the East African Community amended to reflect current status of the bloc, including its membership. At a meeting with the Speaker of the East African Legislative Assembly, Mr. Joseph Nkakirutimana, Ruto said it was inappropriate to use a formative law created in 1999 to manage an expanded membership. So in 1999, we only had 3 countries, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, all right? So he says the bloc must adapt the needs of new members, including language needs, as well as openness to admit new members without restrictions used more than 24 years ago. When it was formed in 1999, the EAC was recreating the collapsed bloc in 1977, where Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania were members. It later expanded to include Rwanda as well as Burundi in 2007, and later South Sudan in 2016, before the Republic of Congo joined last year. Somalia is currently being assessed on eligibility. And some of the issues that the EAC have been giving as the reasons as to why Somalia can't join, instability and all that. There's the same issues being experienced in DRC, but DRC was admitted, but Somalia has not been allowed that membership. So that is also very interesting. And President Ruto also said the bloc must adjust to include enabling members to tap into benefits for the community. So I agree with my president on some of these changes that should be made to make the EAC quite accommodative of its membership that he says has really grown, and perhaps some of the laws and working articles that were put in 1999 might not be alive to the new diverse East African community. So he's saying the EAC should seek to change some of that to be more accommodative. So I think I agree with him some of those things. So, and until 2021, the official language was English. Even when official languages of some member states is French. An EAC Heads of State Summit in 2021, French language was formally endorsed as an official lingua franca, but this has not been adjusted in the treaty. So we are saying, can we adjust some of these things, and can we make EAC workable for everybody there? So I agree there. I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. I'll see you later at 3 p.m., God willing, as we look at that petition that has been signed. That has been filed, not signed. It has been filed in the Nigerian court, challenging the win of our President-elect Tinubu, and 4 people have partnered on that petition, and so I shall be giving you the details of that. Thank you so much for your time. I'll see you later. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.